In my last devlog, I already gave a small outlook on what I want to show to you today. And actually, as I was on vacation for 2 weeks since I made my last video, I had quite some time to work on this game during that vacation. So first things first, I wanted to make several and also bigger rooms, which meant I had to first implement some sort of room switching and camera systems. For the camera, that was actually quite easy, as lots of the things that need to be handled for a camera, like the camera limits, or that the player can move a little bit to the left and right without the camera immediately following him, are actually built-in settings of the camera in Godot. So I just had to activate them and didn't need to write any additional logic or whatever. And what definitely also helped is that basically the day I wanted to start working on the camera, a popular YouTube channel called Game Maker's Toolkit, which I've been watching for many years and which I can highly recommend for people interested in game development, released a video about how to make a good 2D camera. I'll put a link to that video in the description below. And one tip that I took from that video, which is something that I've added on top of the basic camera behavior, is that the camera is not actually following the player directly, but instead it's following a point that's always in front of the player. Because if it follows the player directly, the player is always somewhere in the middle of the screen. And that means that basically if you're walking around, only about half the screen shows the stuff that's in front of you, and half of the screen actually shows the stuff that you've already passed. So in order to give a better overview over what's coming up next, I actually made the camera follow a point that is always a little bit in front of the player, so that basically I can use more screen space to show the things in front of you. And I still think it's good to have some, decent amount of the screen also showing stuff behind you. For example, if an enemy is behind you and attacks you, if you wouldn't see that from behind, then that could feel unfair. But I still think 50-50 split, like it would normally be, is just too much. So now with that technique, actually it's more like 2/3 of the screen showing what's in front of you and 1/3 of the screen showing what's behind you. And I just feel like that makes a lot more sense. So the next thing to work on was the room switching system. What I currently do is basically I just load the entire area that the player is in as a single scene, and then I just track what room the player's current position belongs to and set the camera limits to the boundaries of that room. So if the player walks outside, I just check what room the new position of the player belongs to on that area map, and then I update the camera limits accordingly. But just that alone would feel quite basic, because the camera would literally warp from one place to the other within a single frame if you switch rooms. So for a smoother transition between rooms, I've added a small room switching animation, which is basically just a big black box covering everything that will fade in from one end of the screen and move out the other side. And during the small window where it covers the entire screen, the actual camera transition is happening. In order to make this transition feel a bit more connected to the environment around, I've also made it so that the direction of the transition depends on the direction of you leaving the current room. So if you walk out the left side of the screen, the transition will go from right to left. And if you walk out the right side, the box will go from left to right. Finally, I've added a small pause to the gameplay during the room transition, as actually the room is finished loading already before the screen transition fully finishes. And if the game would just keep playing in the background there, would be about half a second where the player could already move around or take damage in the new room without even seeing what's happening. With these two systems in place, I started working on the biggest topic that I wanted to work on for this episode, which is player abilities. For Metroidvania, it is essential to have some interesting abilities to play with that make you reconsider all the areas you've already been through, thinking about if there's now anything new to find with your newly learned skills. And while I wanted to make some unique abilities, of course, I still also included classics that have been seen in various other games as well, such as a dash or a ground pound, because after all, there's a reason why they are featured in so many different games, because they just work. A dash, a ground pound, similar to double jump and wall jump, which I've already mentioned in the last video, are basically all things that make navigating the world faster and easier. And since you'll be traveling around the world a lot in the Metroidvania, it's generally not a bad thing to have. Another ability that I've added are special points in the world that you can boost yourself towards when in range. They are very similar to the lanterns in Ori and the Blind Forest. However, my game will be less focused on platforming based challenges, so I don't intend to use these for tricky platforming sections or chaining together as many moves as possible without touching the ground, but more in specific rooms here and there to reach new places. And from the way I designed them in my game, they're also a little bit inspired from the grabbable stars from Super Mario Galaxy, as the further away you are when activating the boost, the further the boost will actually fling you. These are, of course, not all special abilities that I've implemented, and you actually might see some footage of further special abilities in this video and also in future devlogs. However, in order to not give everything away in these videos, I won't be going over what exactly they will be doing in the final game, just to also leave some secrets open. And last but not least, once again, I want to give you an outlook of what I plan to work on next. And my first longer term goal is to release a demo with one playable area in order to just get the game out in the world and collect feedback on it. And while it might be easy to think that creating just one area is only a small fraction of the final game, actually, I think it's already a very big amount of the work, as most of the systems that will be in the final game, like saving and loading data, dialogues with NPCs, like all the different menus that you have, for example, for title screen, minimap, etc., they all need to be in place also for that one area demo, because I mean, while they don't have to be in their very polished final version yet, they still have to be there and they have to work just in order for the demo to work. And so I've created a long list of topics that I believe are important to have in order to create a first playable demo at some point. And I've started to prioritize these different topics. And what I want to tackle next are actually basically the things that I just mentioned. So saving and loading data, a dialogue system, a title screen menu, and also a minimap. Of course, not all of these things might be done until my next devlog, as now I don't have that much time to work on the game anymore. However, I think these are just some very important things to do now, as those systems will be used everywhere throughout the final game, and therefore I believe it's important to get them right early on. Anyways, that's it for today's devlog. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next episode.